podcast. Today, I have an amazing guest. Her name is Myisha Young, and we have a very amazing topic that we're going to be talking about today. She's coming on today to share her story about her son. So I'm going to turn it over to Myisha Young.
Hi, God bless you all. May the blessings of the Lord be with you all. I am Myisha. So, I am a single parent. I am from Carson, California. I had my son pretty young at 17. So, me and my son was pretty much raised together. Being that I was a single parent, his father was absentee. I had to deal with the challenges of raising a son by myself with very little support. The support I did have, which was my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather. Up until 2009, my mother passed away from kidney failure. 2016, my grandfather passed away, and then in 2018, my grandmother passed away. So all of the support that I had with raising my son no longer was, present anymore. So that built up anger issues and grievance that we had to face. And because I did not think that my son had needed anger management or therapy or to seek help with his grievance, I didn't get it because I didn't think it was that bad because he was so young. So throughout, after they had passed, my son became very angry. Father's not present, grandmother, great grandparents are no longer there. And then being that he was the only child, he just began to become a little defiant. And I noticed it at the age of 14, maybe 13 and a half, 14, pretty much in high school. And I blame myself because I believe that if I had other children, he would be seeking, friendship outside of home or someone that he could connect to. So he began connecting with kids from school, his little buddies. It became where all his friends were like his brothers now. So he referred to, oh, that's my bro, that's my bro. And I'd be like, no, son, that is not your brother. And I always tell him that friends come and go. But these kids, they cleaned on to my son because my son's very funny, very outgoing. And I had raised him in church. So a lot of his friends were invited to go to church with us. I'm not thinking really too much of it. I'm still thinking that I'm doing a really good job, doing my best raising him. But then I had started getting like phone calls from school, like he's ditching school, not going to school on time. Like I can drop him off at school and he's hitting the fence, and the back of the school ditching, Now that reverts to him smoking weed, hanging out with kids after school, et cetera, just being a knucklehead. But I do believe a lot of the influence came from the music, the culture and the music. So, with this culture, the music is really kind of negative per se. It's all about
It is negative.
shooting, bang, bang, your mama this, and calling women out their names and just derogatory. The music has never been kind of like the same. It always changes with the culture. So I believe the culture of music was a big influence. And then also, I was working, being a single mom, I worked two jobs. I'm a certified hairstylist. So, as a cosmetologist, I was in the shop. And then throughout the evening, I worked at a group home. And then from 11 to 3, I worked at farms, which was a warehouse, a chicken warehouse. So I was working three jobs. So it was pretty hard to kind of keep an eye on him. I would just would tell him, at this time you need to be in the bed. I'm gonna call, I'm gonna check on you, et cetera, et cetera. Then I also had my sister who would check on him often. But then at this time he was leaving the house, and we had a pool in our community, and I would get complaints about him and his friends at the pool being loud, obnoxious. And this is like his 11th grade. This is where they're trying to figure things out, find themselves in high school. In 2018, when my grandmother passed away, we moved from where we were currently staying, which was in Fresno, and we moved to back to Los Angeles. So now at his age, it was kind of hard to transition to a new school. So going to this new school, that means he had to meet new friends. And at this time, a lot of these kids here in Los Angeles are kind of like already involved in some type of activity, whether it's game banging, whether it's sports or whatever. So I put my son in basketball. He was doing really good. He was in basketball playing. He was, bringing his grades up because he was, his grades started falling behind after my grandmother had passed away. So I was trying to get him to get his grades up. So he had to go to an alternative school. So
Mhm.
at this alternative school, it was at a church. He was doing really well playing basketball, and it just everything from there. I guess he started meeting new people. We lived in Long Beach, and
Mhm.
he started meeting new people, and these people were bad influences. Now this is the time he wanted to be. He's an inspiring artist, so he spent a lot of time in the studio. So he's in the studio. He's making music. Now people in his hometown are hearing that he's making music. So now he's like this well-known artist in our community. So now, because the stuff that he's talking about, now these guys or the older people that he connected to somehow, they wanted to know if he was really about that life.
Mhm.
So now he's acting. I like to say acting because I didn't raise my son to be in the streets. Like I said, he was raised in church, with great family, but now he's in the streets as far as like coming home late, coming
Oh,
in at 1, 2 in the morning, coming home smelling like reefer. So
mhm.
now he's connected to a young lady. Now he run away from home. He
Mhm.
run away from home because now, he's dating. So he met a young lady where we had previously moved. So he moved back, which was 200 miles away. So 4 hours away back to Fresno. So now he's left home. He's moved in with a girl. So I connect to the parents and I'm asking them, like, how are you guys letting him live there? X, Y, and Z. He tells a story that I put him out, which I would never put my son out because these streets are not, they're not safe for one, especially in Los Angeles. So they end up letting my son stay there. So now he's, dropping out of school now because I'm asking him, like, well, what are you
Wow.
going to do in school? And oh, we're gonna put him in school, and I'm just like, how you gonna do that? You're not his guardian. So anyhow, he's out in Fresno, and he has really no one to really watch over him because the
Mhm.
parents, they're a pretty cool family, but they can't really, because the mother was a probation officer up at the prison up north, and the father was a truck driver. So they're not being really supervised. So
Mhm.
now she has a car, they're hanging out, they're just doing big kid stuff, thinking they're adults. He ends up having an affair with another young lady, and she ended up pregnant. So
Mhm.
now, so I have a 3-year-old grandson. So because of the baby, him and the young lady had some challenges. So they put him out. So
Mhm.
when he got put out, that forced him to move to some friend's house. From one friend house to another friend house to another friend. And I'm not knowing this is happening. I'm thinking he's at the house with the young lady. Because if I had known, I would have made him come back home. So but once they split up, like I said, he was going from couch to couch surfing with his friend guys. And this particular day, he got into trouble. A friend of his that they grew up with was killed. So they had a candlelight visual, and a lot of the young adolescents or juveniles, they all met up for a candlelight, and there were several of them that had guns. Now, I always told my son, don't get in a car with other people because you never know what influence they are, even if they have the experience to drive or if they might be intoxicated. So I tell them, don't get in a car with strangers. Well, kids like to do what they want to do. So he got in a car coming from a candlelight visual, and they got stopped by the police. And there were 5 juveniles in the car, and one of them had a gun.
Oh, wow.
So my son, trying to be cool, took the rap because these young men had already had priors. So it was said that if one of them had took it, he was going to face 5 to 10 years. So they felt like because my son never been incarcerated before and had a good rap sheet, that if he took it, it'd be his first charge, and then it wouldn't be so hard on him. So my son took it. So I'm like I said, I'm in Long Beach. He's in Fresno. So I got a call that he was incarcerated. I had to go out there and go to court dates. So they allowed him on house arrest. So, and I let the attorney know he was out there because of a young lady. He's never been in trouble before. I had aunts and uncles and leaders from the church speak on his behalf that he was very involved in church and whatnot. So they allowed him to come home back to me on house arrest, which had involved with him having an ankle monitor. So being that he was home and he still had to go to court, he had to go to court back and forth to Fresno.
Mm.
And so it was a challenge because it was still between the pandemic. So it was hard to get him back and forth to court. So this particular time, he had to go to court and I couldn't make it with him because usually I would take him so that he wouldn't be late and he wouldn't dip off with other kids and get sidetracked because kids will do that. So this time I thought he was more mature. I said, okay, I'm gonna allow you to go out there. He already had made arrangements to stay at someone's house so that he could get to court in the morning. So he that was the plan. I allowed him to go to take the trip. So coming to find out, he never made court that morning. I had told him, I said, you got to put yourself on calendar. Okay, mom, I'm going to put myself on calendar. So the young man, another young man that he was very close to, passed away. So he was like, well, mom, I'm going to stay out here another week because I want to be there for my boy. He passed away. I'm staying with his mom and his brother and the family, and I'm going to, stay. And I would just told him I'm a visionary, so I had a dream, and I called my son. I said, son, you need to come home because I see the enemy trying to trap you. You need to come home. And he was like, well, I'm going to stay here a little longer because I want to see my son. So when he said that he wanted to see the baby, I said, okay, that's fine. So being with that, the baby mom kept playing games. Oh, you can see him tomorrow, and wouldn't allow my son to see him. So he extended his time. So if he was there for court, the friend that passed away, and for the baby. So, like I said, he is an artist. So, one particular night, he was going to an Airbnb with about 20 other young men and girls. They were getting ready for a music video. So, on their way to a music video, they were driving a Tesla. One of the girls was driving a family member's car, and they had a little too long than what they were supposed to, so they had reported it stolen. Somehow between them leaving from where they were leaving from to their destination to the Airbnb, they got detained by the police. They got stopped by the police, and my son hopped out the car and made his way. He was crossing the street, but he was jaywalking. So because he was jaywalking, the police stopped him, and my son took it upon himself to run. So now he's running from the police. The police, they chased him with the dogs and whatever, whatnot, and they detained him. So they got him for being in a car. Once again, after he was already in the first car, the first case. So it was basically, they did put a bench warrant for his arrest because he didn't make it to court. So
Mm.
they got him for a bench warrant and basically breaking his kind of like, I guess, like a contract from the first time. Like he promised not to get in no more trouble. Not to
Mm.
be seen with the young man that from the first incident. So basically, I forget that it's a terminology for it, but basically, just not holding his end of the bargain. So he was detained, and then coming to find out, there were other crimes that was attached to this one particular night that happened days before, and it led up to that day. So I guess 2 days prior, his friend mother was getting beat by her boyfriend. My son was spending the night. My son was asleep, and the 6 young men came to pick up my son and was like, "Come ride with us. We about to go and look
Mm,
for the boyfriend." So they beat up the boyfriend really bad,
mm,
and he had some belongings that belonged to the mother. Well, one of the boys picked up the belongings, so that was robbery, and it happened to be my son, which he said, "Mom, it was nothing but her phone." So they got him for robbery, then the car,
mm.
and then it was just a collective of things.
Okay, let me ask you this before we get into the second phase of what happened with him. So I was writing things down as you're talking, and I have so many questions, but we don't have enough
No,
time.
it's okay.
So tell me if you don't want to talk about something, or if you would rather pass on a question.
Oh, I'm an open book. I'm very transparent.
So was his father ever in his life, like during the whole time, or if he was just MIA, just period?
No, his father was my first love. We were high school sweethearts. His mother had passed on. No, his brother had passed on. And so he started dealing with like mental illness and whatever. But he was there from the beginning. Like he was there throughout my whole pregnancy. He was there at the hospital. He cut the cord. He was there all the way up to maybe my son was 2. Now, he was only but around the corner from us, so he seen him, but he wasn't involved as he should. Like, he wasn't doing the doctor visits, or he wasn't coming up to the school and doing,
Just wasn't active.
just wasn't active. He was there, he was present, but it wasn't active because we were young. We were really young. He was still trying to figure himself out too.
Okay, so let me ask you this. So you said once there was some death in your family. You said your grandmother and your aunt.
My grandfather, and my aunt. I mean, my mother, my it was so many of them. My mother first in 2009, then my grandfather in 2016, and then my grandmother in 2018.
And then you said after that, that's when your son started having anger issues, right? And
Hmm.
so this is important. And then this is why I brought my Aisha on here, because first, I want to commend you for coming on here to have this conversation, because I know that this is not easy. But there are a lot of women who are going through this. They are single mothers and they are raising sons, and they are in environments where they don't, people could easily say, well, just make them stay in a house, or you could just keep him away from them. And it's like, it's very difficult to do that when you are in that atmosphere, and everywhere they go, that is the type of atmosphere they're around, right? So if you're living in one area and then you go visit, yeah, you can pull him out of that, yeah, you can keep him away from there. But when they go to school, when they at church, when they outside the church house, when he walking home, when he go to the store, like everywhere he goes, you have these, not friends, he has these associates who are in those atmospheres, and it's very hard and it's very difficult to separate yourself and get away from the things that are going on when you're sitting right in it. So let's start there. She was working 2 and 3 jobs trying to provide for the family, so it's very difficult, her as a single parent, to be able to just monitor him that way. And then once a child gets a certain age, they are able to get into certain situations and you don't even know that they in these situations,
Hmm.
because they can be good at hiding things, right? So you said that he was having some issues with anger, and that you felt like it wasn't that important during that time because he was just going through some emotional stuff because some of the family members they had passed. So did he continue to have these anger issues throughout the years, or he was just angry at first but then he just started hanging around the wrong crowd?
Well, I believe it was the anger issue came first.
Did it did
And
it
it came
stay?
first because of the father, him wanting the connection of having a father. We had a neighbor, and me and his mother was really close, and he was in football, but his father was very active in his life. So my son would see him and his father like throwing the football together in front of the house, and he would ask me like, "Well, why my daddy don't come over?" and things like that. And he'd get angry because my son was an all-star. I had him in every sport you can think of: football, basketball, baseball, cross country, long. He was participated in long jump, high jump, and even in water polo. So when during practice or even his games, he was always looking in the crowd and trying to find his father. And his dad would make these broken promises. I'll be there. At the end, when he don't find him, his little heart was broken, and his dad had all these excuses why he was late or he couldn't make it. So I start seeing that little anger issues come. Then when the passing of my mother and my grandfather, and how I knew that was something that he was dealing with. My grandmother had said, Myisha, you need to talk to him. And I said, why? She said he hit the wall, he punched the wall, and said, if God is real, why he let my grandmother and grandpa go or die?
So let me ask you this, Myisha. So as you look back, because there are so many different phases within the years of you raising him, but as you look back now, and this is for all the mothers who are listening to this, who are raising nephews, sons, cousins, who are stepping in, helping your sisters raise their children or whatever the situation is, even if it's little girls, because raising a child is raising a child. What are some things you feel like, or some advice you can give women who are raising young children and they are starting to see different things within their behavior, right? This is before he even started hanging around the wrong crowd. Just his behavior at home. What are some things you can say to women to help them get through, or some advice or things that you would have done different within that time frame?
I think the most important is always having an open dialogue with your children, being able to have those conversations, but not too much where they think that you're their friend. Because I believe I did that, where I was willing to have any type of conversation with him. So now it's like, oh, now he thinking like, nah, like that's my homegirl. No, I'm your mother. Even though we're having those difficult conversations about sex, weed, drugs, gangs, all that, they get a little too comfortable,
Mhm.
right? And I was not a mother that really put my hands on my son. I was more of the takeaway mom where I took away his PlayStation or Xbox. I took away whatever he liked, and that didn't even work because now he'll go figure find something else to do. So my advice to mothers is have an open dialogue with your children, and then have be someone they can really talk to and trust everything they tell you. Don't take it lightly if they say that they're feeling a certain way. And don't just kind of like be so quick to shun them off or turn them away, because sometimes kids are having mental issue problems, or, having negative thoughts. So I will always say seek help. That's something that I did when he was telling me that he was feeling sad. I looked into it. I made sure I sought him some help. But the doctor told me it was nothing but ADHD. So I kind of like paid attention to red flags, to behavior issues when he didn't want to eat, or times when he didn't want to be left alone. I would just say just pay attention to the signs, and then pay attention to their friends. I thought that I was doing good paying attention to the type of friends he hung around, getting to know their parents. If he wanted to go to the movies, I made sure I communicated with the parents and made a plan. So who's going to drop off, who's going to pick up, things of that nature, and making sure that you have open communication with campus monitors or the teachers. And my son had classes, his ADHD, so I had open communication with one of his counselors. They would call me very regularly and let me know he wasn't having a good day today at school. So me and the teacher had to come up with an activity, or kind of like a program for him. Like if he was upset, they would allow him to leave his table and go to a happy, they called it his happy corner, but his happy corner where he's able to express the way he feels. So I think it's very important to have communication with teachers, and have a support system, a peer group, people that you can talk to, or people that he can speak to, because most of the times a lot of kids are not comfortable just going to their parents, or to giving opening up to the parents. A lot of times they go to my sister, or my auntie or uncle, because there were things that my sister would tell me that he never really told me. So I just thinking, just being really mindful of looking at the red flags and getting help before it's too late.
Okay. Let me ask you this, Myisha. You said that he was in a lot of different sports. So is this in his younger years, like up until junior high?
All the way from younger years, all the way up to 11th grade.
Because I know when I was growing up, and then like the older ladies, they would always have this saying that a idle mind is a devil's playground,
David
right?
Playground.
So, do you think that when you kept him busy within sports or just doing different things, that it helped him so that he didn't get in as much trouble? And then once he hit maybe like 11th grade, he just didn't really have the desire. He got a little older, he got a little bit more trickier, and like the way he was doing things, and so he had more freedom to just get into trouble. What's your point of view for like women who are trying to figure out, they're starting to have some issues with their children, and it's like, okay, so what do I do now to keep him out of trouble? What is your opinion on keeping your children busy in sports or just activities?
I think it's very important to keep in sports because even when he wasn't in sports around the corner, so we lived in a pretty nice neighborhood. We didn't like, it wasn't kind of like rough or anything. It was really nice area because I wanted to give him the best because pretty much I was raised in a nice upper class area. So when I had relocated, I wanted to make sure that he was in one of the best schools. These schools that he went to were predominantly like a mix. It was really mixed. So he was like, most of the time he was probably the only black kid in class. So he had to deal with being the only brown, but then I would also make sure that he was engaged with other people like him. So I would take him to the Boys and Girls Club. Then we had church activities, going to church. And I'm very involved, very heavy involved in church. So he was always at church. But then from second grade, that's when he started playing football. And he started playing all sports all the way up to, like I said, to the 11th grade. And then it's crazy because sometimes a lot of these sports, you have to pay, and some of these mothers don't have the money, especially single women that come from low housing or something. You have to pay, and sometimes you don't get tuition or get sponsored by certain places to help. So there was times where I had to get the help to get him cleats, $80, uniform. So
Yeah.
I was getting that help and that support from my mother and my grandparents until it got difficult for me to keep having to do that. Even when we moved to Los Angeles and him being in basketball, it was still hard for me because I'm still young and I'm still trying to get my together. And remind you, I went to school 4 different times to college and wasn't able to finish because I didn't have no help. It was rough even for me. But I would encourage mothers to get your kids involved in sports or any type of academics or Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, after school programs. And even those places, because we were having trouble at the Boys and Girls Club because there were older kids coming up there smoking weed in the back. It was hard to keep him in a safe environment because
It
it was
was.
always a little sprinkle of little kids doing this and doing that everywhere. And even a lot of times, like, he's in prison now, and he was like, "Mom, you remember such and such was on my basketball team? Well, he's here." I remember a principal telling my son that he would never be nothing. And guess what? My son called me and seen that same principal in prison
Oh,
for
wow.
child molestation.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. So let's get to this point here. After your son gets in trouble the second time, and then you get an ideal of he has all these different issues going on, everything that he really hasn't been telling the truth about is starting to come to light, right? So stuff is starting to get exposed. He got in trouble the second time and then he ran. So what happened after that?
He was caught. They detained him, and because this was his second time, they had to basically keep him and prosecute him.
Oh, wow.
So there were 4 cases, 4 counts for several things, for different cases. And so they gave him, it would be 5 years, so it was 2 years and then 3 years probation. But he's been incarcerated since 2002, and so it's going on to this 2004. So he be home 2024 of June. For next year, he'll be 2025. I'm sorry, he'll be
Oh,
home next year. It was rough having to go to court every other month. Then having the toughest thing was having to take my grandson to go see him. I never thought that I would have to take my grandson to see his father. because there was a time where I had to take my son to see his father, and I was just like, I would never do this again. And
Um,
so it's like it was a pattern now, like a generational curse
the
now.
generation of curse. So
And it's, yeah. So even when I see my son, he was sitting in the same place his father sat in, and I'm
um,
just like, oh my God, I've seen this before. So it was difficult. Then having a support and having people around me. Oh, you allowed him to do this, and it's your fault, and you should have did X, Y, and Z. I can only do so much. And like you said, when they're out of our sight, they're, I didn't think my son was no hoodlum. I couldn't even tell you. I would never thought my son would ever go to prison. So he's been incarcerated. He started off in the county. Then they transferred him to I guess it's called restitution type of thing. So he was there, and then he went to one prison because of his ADHD. I let the lawyer know that he suffered mental illness. So they put him in a prison where it was like for people who had mental illnesses or been there their first time. So they put him there. He was getting to it there because they put him on medication, and his medication that they had put him on was giving him like bad anxiety. He started seeing things, so he would get into it. And so then now they sent him to Lancaster, a lot closer to where I am. So he's in a level 4 now, one of the kind of toughest prisons there are, where he's locked up with murderers, rapists, game bangers, people who are lifers too.
let me ask you this. As a mother, right? And I know you just touched on this, and I think that this is important because there are some women who are going to watch this and they have children, a son or a daughter who's in the process of being incarcerated, or else they are. Even if you have children or teenagers and you have them watch this video, ladies and gentlemen, this is very important. And then I'm going to touch on a few things in a minute. But can you give some pointers on how you got through this? Because it takes a certain type of mindset to be able to handle this, right? Because you do have people saying it's your fault. You do have people saying that you could have done more. You do have people judging you. And at the end of the day, you're saying that you're only one person and that you didn't have any help. And for the majority of it, it seems like you were working trying to put a roof over his head. I can only do so much. Some women completely understand everything you're saying, and then some women won't. But for the women who are dealing with this exact situation right now and they feel like they're going to lose their mind, they're embarrassed, they're ashamed, they feel guilt. What are some things that you can say to them to help them get through this process? Because you have some mothers whose sons are not coming home at all, right? You have
Yes.
some mothers whose sons have done some really, really bad things, some very difficult things to even talk about. So, what is some advice or just some conversation you can give the women to help them get through this process?
I want to just add on what some others resources I tried
Okay.
was the work connection. It's a program where they can get their units if they weren't finished with school. I even tried Job Corps. I tried Big Brother's program to get him mentors. Even when I seen the red flags, I even contacted the police department to see if they had ride-alongs
Mm,
and scare straight programs. And
mm,
they didn't offer none of those programs.
mm,
But what I will say to mothers, thank God that I'm very rooted in the word. So I believe that what sustained my mental health was I've been surrounded by a community of advocates, like in faith community, a lot of prophetic people. So I would get a lot of prophetic word, and that would help me because it was always promises from God. Just be still. I have you covered. I got you back. He's protected. But I think what's really keeping me sustained and keeping him is that I'm a praying mother.
mm,
I make sure that I don't do nothing without praying. When I'm getting up, I'm praying. And not only praying, but fasting. I
mm.
fast for my son. When he was going through the court, I was fasting. I would go to court with my tallit on and just be praying in the back of the court. So my faith is really, really what sustained me. So I would tell women, if you have sisters in Christ, get with your sisters in Christ to uplift you. We're stronger when we come together in prayer. Or get you a journal when you have certain thoughts. Don't speak things over them. But that was one thing I had to make sure I wasn't speaking death over my son. I made sure,
That's important.
Yeah, and the great thing is what we have now is that they're able to call, and you don't have to pay for the call. They have tablets in prison where you can see them. So that gave me comfort knowing that I can see him over like on video chat like this. Yeah, so that saves money for transportation, going out of town and going through all the other hoops to see him. So that's very helpful. I'm able to send him messages, little emojis to help him because you don't know what they're going through in there. They're going through a lot. My son has PTSD, he has anxiety. So I have to make sure that I'm not going down his throat because there's many times I wanted to like let him have it. Like, dude, stop calling, stop begging for money. I'm over here struggling too. But I had to make sure the words that I gave him were encouraging because I didn't want it to offset him. And now he's walking around the prison. Now he's talking back to the guards. And I tell him, don't talk back to a man with a gun. So I would just encourage mothers, if your sons are in prison, be careful how you speak to them. What's the word of God where it says, be quick to listen and slow to speak? So I let him pour out to me. And then I always make sure we pray. I give him scriptures to read to strengthen him and to encourage him. So just be their motivation. I motivate my son every time I talk to him. I don't remind him of what he did. I just let him know the next time, make a better decision. I always ask him the 5 minute rule. What is your 5 minute rule? Stop, think. What are your consequences? What would Jesus do? So I tell him all the time, this is just a season in your life that you're being tested. And I reminded him what about Paul and Silas, and that it was a test of their faith. I reminded him today, I said, some of the most brightest people have been incarcerated, like Nelson Mandela, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. And so I just try to encourage him that it's not over. God is maybe really preserving you, preserving a generation, because it has been said and prophesied that he's going to be a prophet and he's going to be a preacher. So I see, like, now that he's incarcerated, I see him growing. Now that he's around other men, even though these men have all made mistakes. But the great thing is that God still loves them. God still forgives them. And so I would tell the mothers, like, forgive yourself. It's not your fault. Sometimes God has to take these kids, remove them from us so that we can lean more on God. Because sometimes we make our kids like our idols sometimes. Everything is done for them. We can't get to church because we're taking care of them. So sometimes God has to separate it, and he does it in such a way we may not even understand. Because at first I was crying, I was had a pity party, like, oh my God, my baby. And I remember the Lord having to speak to me and said that I rescued him. And I'm just like, I didn't understand. And God had to reveal it to me because I had many dreams that my son getting hurt in the streets. So God had to remind me that I'm preserving him. I had to protect him. So I just thank God that he's somewhere where I know, because there's been many sleepless nights. I didn't know where my son was because he hasn't called, or he lost his phone or left his phone, because my son was very irresponsible. So I would just encourage women to just have a strong prayer life for these young men, because even though they're off the streets and in there, it's a whole different life in there. There's people still getting. My son witnessed someone die last night. So like, you still have to pray them through, because anything is bound to happen in there. You hear so many stories, and then there's more influences in there. Now he's in there with adults. My son is only 21, and to me, he's still young, and he never liked authority. So he told me today, Mom, some guy told me that I needed to go and wipe the tables. And so I told him, I said, well, be a servant for God. You're not doing it for them, you do it for the Lord. I said, just do it so that nothing stems from it. I said, because it could start from one thing to another. I said, son, just go do it. Because now that's teaching him about responsibility. It's teaching him the things that I was teaching him, but it's confirming some things. Now he got to get up and clean up. There were times I would tell my son, you need to clean your room. In prison, they'll knock you in your head if you don't get up and clean up. So it's kind of redirection. He's getting redirected. So I would just tell parents or mothers, fathers, whoever children are incarcerated, just be prayerful, just pour into them. I think my biggest thing is being careful what you speak over their lives. and know that there's hope for them. It's not the end. Because at first I'm just like, oh, you messed up your record. But so what that made me do was, now me as a mother, I went and started LLC so that when I start my business, when he get out, he worked for me. He
Right.
had a job. So it made me create a job for him, because now I'm like, okay, it's going to be harder for him to come and transition when
Right.
it's time. So I said, I'm just going to start. So I got his logos all together. So I'm doing his business part on the outside. So I would encourage mothers, start laying down a foundation and building something for them to come home to if they have little time. There's some that's going to be in there for a while. Oh, and always have a cash app. Back then, I heard that people had to go to a certain place and get money. Now, with digital technology, it's easy now. So when my son need money, I just hit the cash app, and he's fine with $25. I think we're just in a culture now. It makes it a lot easier for mothers who children are incarcerated versus back then when you didn't have access to none of this. I think it's a lot easier now to mentally just protect our mental health, because we got to make sure we still taken care of. They're gonna be all right, especially if we have faith. So I just feel like you got to have a strong faith to be able to deal with a child being incarcerated.
You made a lot of valid points. And so you're saying that his mindset, that even though he's in this situation, you can see that there's growth and that he's learned from this. And so he is not the same person. And so that is amazing. But let me say this, let me chime in for a minute because this is important. I have two sons that I've raised, and this is for mothers. You have to be very watchful of the company that your children keep. And I'm going to say this, they can bring kids to the house and they can, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. They can be on their best behavior. You would think these kids they're hanging with are the best things walking, right? Go to their social media page. Okay. Find out their social media pages, see what kind of stuff they're posting, go to their house, see what the family dynamics is like, right? Your daughter come home or your son will come home and say, I'm going over Jimmy Lee house. Okay, where does Jimmy Lee live? Around the corner. Okay, so we all get in the car. We all gonna go over there because I need to see what's going on at Jimmy Lee's house, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think sometimes children know how to trick you. Okay, children know how to play that game and have you thinking that they are children who do not have any issues or that they are not a bad influence. And what I'm saying to you is that you need to pay attention to the company that your children keep. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
find out their social media handles. That tells a lot. That is their personality. That is who they are. That is what they're into. That is their belief system. Those are the things that they are currently doing. And so um, you have to figure out ways, sometimes creative ways to be in the know of what's going on. Pop up to the house sometimes. They don't have to know you getting off work early. Okay. Where I'm at the mall, but I'm around the corner, but you don't know that because I'm gonna pop up at home in 5 minutes. Like you have to, there has to be some mystery to you. No child should know your schedule. Mama go to work at 8, she get off at 5, traffic should be home by 6, no later 6:30, she going to Walmart, get some groceries. No, I'm gonna take off early day, I'm gonna pop up, right? I'm not going to Walmart today. I'm coming straight home. So I'm there. You cannot just have a routine where they know you like clockwork. Like there has to be some mystery, use some pop ups. But I want to thank you for coming on this platform, Myisha,
Thank
because
you.
there are a lot of women who will not talk about this. They've isolated themselves. You have some women who are suffering from depression. They don't want to face the community because they feel like when people see them, they see the things that have went on with their children who are incarcerated. Myisha is a prime example that you can still have a life. She says the best thing to do is to still pray over your children, speak life over your children. And when they reach out to you and then when they call you, to still be positive, because once they get off the phone with you, there are certain things can trigger them and then you can make a situation worse because your response to them when they were on the phone talking to you, right? They're calling mom because they need to feel secure. They're calling mom because they need to, hear that voice that say, I love you. They're calling mom because they know that they've made mistakes, right? They have to sit in that every day, right? We are not actually sitting in the mistake. They are sitting in it. So if they're calling you, they're calling you for a reason. So it's so important to speak life over your children. And the way you treat them does matter. Nobody is perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. Some people just have gotten caught and some people have not. So again, is there any projects or anything you're working on, any social handles the ladies can find you on?
So my only social handle that I have is Myisha Young on Facebook and Myisha Bell on Facebook. Myisha Bell Facebook is more a platform for ministry. I'm ordained apostle. I have Forever Blessed Ministry. I'm doing a lot of outreach coming up for a nonprofit for women and for children. So the next several months, I'm just gonna do what God tell me. I really don't announce a lot of things because it's always like last minute things or just if God say go, I go. So, but they can keep at Facebook. Inbox me if you ever need questions or if you just need someone to pray with or just some words of encouragement. I'm always available. So yeah.
Thank you, Myisha. And again, ladies, pay attention to the company that your children keep. I have three grown children, and there have been some kids that came to the house, and you would never know just by looking at them that they were into the situations they were into, shocking me off my feet. Right? They look nothing like
What they
the
do.
characters they had. I'm telling you, like they know how to trick you. Pay attention to your children. How are they acting once they start hanging around these children, right? So again, I am Demara Virgil, and this is Queendom Conversations podcast. I hope you ladies have been blessed by this. Thank you so much, Myisha, for coming on here.
Thank you.
And until next time, ladies, thank you all.